Hi, I'm Kim Jamieson-Hirst at Chatterbox Quilts, and today I'm going to show you how to create your own applique design from something that isn't an applique pattern at all. So let's get started. Let's talk about what you need to make your own applique project. Well, the first thing you're going to need is a design, of course. Now, where can you find designs? Well, you can find designs all over the place. You don't have to look at applique patterns to make your own applique design, right? Where I like to look at is coloring pages, okay, like online coloring sites. So there's a million of them. Okay, maybe not a million, but there's a lot. And there's a lot of free coloring patterns that would work really great as applique designs. So I have chosen one today. It's a stack of teacups. So if you look below in the description, I will put a link to this specific pattern where you can print it off and you can get it for free, right? So this is great, but it's not really what I can use yet because I am going to be using Fusible web applique or raw edge applique. When you do that, the image you are going to use has to be in reverse for you to trace the pieces that you're going to put on your project. Okay, that sounds confusing, doesn't it? Just follow along with me, right? All right, so the first thing you need to do is once you've found your design is you need to print it off in reverse or mirror image, however you call that. And to do that, you will usually, I'm using a Mac, so I'm in preview with this. This is a PDF I downloaded. So I went into my preview and you can see what this looks like when I go to print. And I'm showing you the area that you need to click on. So it's going to print reversed or in mirror or flipped horizontally is what they'll call it here. So once you do that, what you're going to get is you're going to get an image that looks like this. Okay, so it's the mirror image of the original one. My pattern, my project is going to look like this, but I need it like this first to trace onto Fusible Web, and I want to walk you through that process now and how to do that. But before you get into that, there's something else you need to do. So this is a coloring page, right? It is not made for applique. When you do this type of applique, you want your pieces to overlap. You don't want to have gaps between your applique pieces where the background might show through. That's just not going to be what we want. So to do that, what I usually will do, and I do this in applique designs, applique patterns that I buy if they haven't provided me with separate pieces or if they haven't done this on a design that looks like this. I want to make sure that I do this next step, which is to create an overlap or an underlap, whichever you want to call it. I know they're different, but I guess it's probably an underlap really in most cases for each piece. So I'm looking at this teacup here, for example, which actually did not have an edge to it. So I put that in and then I just trace this line. So I just will take my pattern and I will just, make sure that I've got extra fabric in that piece. It's going to go underneath this one. Okay. And I'm doing that for all of them. So you can see that I've done that with the handle because the handle here is going to go underneath this piece as well. Same with these handles. This handle's going to go behind this piece. So you need to think a little bit about how this shape is going to be created. It's not hard. You just need to think a little bit about it. And again, I've got this second cup here that I need to draw a little bit of a line. So it's going to have excess fabric that's going to go underneath this one here. When I come down to the bottom, rather interesting here, I've got this, as you can see here, I've got this little saucer, right? And you can see that it goes behind this cup. So I needed to draw a line for that piece. So it's going to go, behind the cup. There's going to be fabric back there. And I also drew a line at the front. So this whole piece here is actually for this. Okay. So I would cut it out. That way I know that there's enough fabric. It's going to go behind the teacup and it's going to be underneath this part of the saucer at the front. So not difficult to do, but kind of essential, all right, to do that before you start tracing onto your Fusible web. So the next step I would do is exactly that. I want to trace it onto my Fusible web. Now, when I trace onto Fusible web, I'm going to be tracing on the paper side. I like to use a Sharpie permanent marker. This is an ultra fine point marker. It doesn't bleed. I can see it easily. It works really well. So that's what I want to do next. So I need to use, well, I don't need to use, but I'm fortunate enough to have a light box, right? So this one, I will put a link up above in the description below so you can see where you can get this one. I just need to get it turned on here. So I've got my light box turned on, and I'm just going to take this reversed design here. You notice I'm not using this cup at the top. So I'm just going to place this here, and then I'm going to put my Fusible web over top. Now, I like to use Wonder Under. There's all different kinds of brands. I find it easy to get, and it's economical, so I like to use it. So what I would do next is I would just take my Fusible web, and I'm just going to put this over here somehow. I just want to trace. I'm not going to trace all of these. I'm not going to make you watch me do all of that. But just to get the idea, and I could cut this if I wanted to, but I'm just going to lay it out like that. And I'm just trying to, I'm going to trace this shape here, the one teacup there, and I've labeled them teacup 3. And I'm trying not to take up any more of the Fusible web than I need to. That's what I'm doing here. So you can move this around any way you want to trace it. It doesn't have to be, you know, straight on or anything like that. And then I'm just going to use my marker to trace along the lines here. And remember, I'm going down into this area down here. Doesn't have to be perfect, especially this part, as long as there's an underlap there. And then we just trace along these lines. You can see how easy it is to see with the light box. I love working with this. It's inexpensive, it works very well. Makes it a lot easier to trace it up against a window. So that would be teacup 3. So I'm going to put teacup 3 on that. And then I could trace the handle if I wanted, or maybe another teacup, whatever I want to. I will just keep tracing till they're all there. I'm just going to trace the second teacup here because I want to show you how to put these together. Because what I like to do, obviously I'm going to put these on some background fabric, right? But what I like to do is to assemble my applique shapes first if I can. So I have one unit before I place it on my background. So much easier to make sure I get it exactly where I want it to be. All right, so you would continue until you have traced all those shapes, right? Let's move that off, and let's turn this guy off. And we're going to move him back here, just to get him out of the way for now. So the next thing you want to do is cut out your shape. I know it's noisy, isn't it? The only thing worse than this is parchment paper, I think. But I'm going to cut this out, and I'm not going to cut along the traced lines yet. Okay, the drawn lines yet. I'm going to cut out around this so I can get this smaller and work with it. There we go. All right, let me put that out of the way. Okay, and then I will go into these. Now, you can, if you want, you can window these. And what windowing means, and I might do that in the bigger teacup 1 shape, it means removing the inside of the Fusible web. So I would leave an edge here, and I would just cut inside and cut out the excess Fusible web. That way it's not quite as stiff when you put it down. But for this particular project, it's just going to be a wall hang. I'm not overly concerned with that. Okay, so I have my 2 shapes here. Aren't they interesting? Yes, they are. Okay, teacup 2 and 3. The next thing you want to do is you want to put these on some fabric, right? They don't look very interesting like this. So let me think about what fabrics I want to use. Now I have a bunch of different fabrics here that I have chosen for this project. And so I have different fabrics for the teacups, different fabrics for the handles. And if you just come back and take a quick look at this again, because they're all stacked together, I want to make sure I've got some differences, some contrast in my fabrics that I choose. You can see they're all kind of reddish color, but you can see that I've got a smaller size fabric scale here in this fabric than I do in this one, for example, and I've got some solids in here too. So you can mix things up by different colors or even different scale if the fabrics are a similar color. And I want to make sure they're going to be a bit different because otherwise you're not really going to see the teacups very well, right? Okay, so let me just think about this, and to put this down on my fabrics, I need a pressing mat. Let me just grab that. All right, so I've got my pressing mat, and I'm also going to use this. Okay, so this is a sheet that you can use to put your Fusible web on. It will keep it from sticking to things. It will keep it when we go to assemble them all together. I'll be able to assemble them on here and just peel it off. So the Fusible web will come off this very easily. I like to use this when I'm pressing. Especially I will use it a lot of times between the iron. Like I'll have the iron on top and whatever I'm working with underneath. So if there's any excess glue that comes out, it doesn't get on my iron. Not too concerned about that today because I know I don't have any excess fusible web hanging out here, so I'm not too concerned. But let's say we want to use, let's say for one of the teacups, we're going to use this green, and we want to take this and we want to make sure that it is wrong side up. We also want to make sure that it is pressed. Now, one caveat here when I'm working with this pressing mat is this applique pressing sheet, I should call it. It gets really hot when you press it, so don't touch it where you've pressed it. Let it cool for a bit, okay? So I have this wrong side up, and I'm going to fuse this down, okay? Just a dry iron will work for this. Just takes a few seconds, and we're good to go. So there's one of my teacups. Let's use maybe this fabric. This is pretty, isn't it? Let's use this guy. We've already used it for some other things here. There's a little chunk taken out of it. Let's take a bit more out. I'm going to press it first. Okay, I always like to press my fabric before I fuse to it. And the reason I do that is if I don't, that wrinkle or whatever's in there, that crease may get stuck right on my fabric, right? So I'm going to, you can be choosy here. I've got a little flower in the middle there. I'm going to press and see if we can capture that little flower design. All right, so I've got that there. So the next step you would do is to actually cut these out. And at this point in time, you can cut them out right on the traced line, okay? So I'm using fairly good sized scissors here because these are fairly good sized pieces. But if you had small little applique pieces, like perhaps the handles, you might want to go with a smaller scissors. Even like little embroidery scissors can work really well for this. Alrighty, so let's just cut this guy out here. So I've cut out both of these shapes, and now I want to take the paper off the back of them. So I often use just a straight pin to kind of score it, and this makes it quite easy to get this off, aside from the static cling that happens. And the reason I do this is I don't like fussing at the edges. It's often hard to get them off the edges, and it can fray your fabric when you do that. So I'll do this. Okay, so we have these two pieces that don't look like teacups at all, but they are, trust me. All right, so at this point in time, I am looking for, wherever I put it, there it is. I'm looking for my actual shapes, okay? Because now they're flipped over, they are actually going to be the right way, okay? So you can see how this would work. That would go like that, and this guy is going to go like this, I think. Yes, that looks about right. All right, so this would actually go underneath, right? So there's my little teacups there. So I can use this like this. Sometimes I just eyeball it. You may want to put it underneath here, you know, and lay them out, because then you can actually press on this, right? You can't do that in your light box, but you can do this here. Okay, and let's just work with it again. And let's say we're putting those two pieces together, all right? So at this point in time, I could then adhere them. Okay, and usually I would use some steam here. I'm not, just because I don't use steam usually, but I would just spray it with water if I don't want to use steam. And I don't necessarily want them to be, you know, really super fused to each other. I'm just kind of setting them together, but you can see they're one piece now. So if I go to put it on my background, then I will have, you know, I would continue building this, and I would have one piece like this, for example. You can see how that all fits on there. So that is actually my stack there. So that is what I actually used as far as fabrics for the different teacups. And you can see the handles and everything in the saucer, so you can see how the saucer goes behind, right? And that is what I want to use to put on something, okay? So what I am going to do with this particular one is put it on some background fabric, because I want to use this wall hang. You could put these on a pillow, you know, you can make a pillow design with them. You know, all different kinds of things you could do with them. You could use this as one block and have a whole bunch of other ones that you use to create a quilt with several blocks. But I'm keeping it pretty simple. And what I did is I just cut out some background fabric. I just figured out what size, approximately what size I wanted, depending on my shape. I added some borders as well, and I will just have this as a wall hanging, right? Now, if you want to center this on your background, you just fold it into quarters and you give it a little bit of a press. Okay, so like this, just a quick press. You don't want, to set in some creases or anything like that. But then you can see where you've got the center marked, and then I can kind of play around with this so where I can see it looking centered, okay? So however I want that. At this point in time, my next step would be just to fuse it down. Check your manufacturer's instructions. Usually there's some steam, so for me, I just spray it very gently with some water, and then I use my iron to press it all down. And then I am at the next stage, which will be in another video to tell you what you would do next with this to create a gorgeous wall hanging. Thanks for watching today. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Be sure to share it with your quilty friends. And remember to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com for more helpful quilting information.